I think of all the churches of the red pill, MGTOW are the group of men most attracted to the red pill because of its narrative framework. Similar to Neo in The Matrix, who learns that the world he thought was real is actually a computer generated lie, MGTOW have probably experienced some sort of disillusionment with the world relationships. Maybe they've been divorced, maybe they've been bullied, maybe they've been rejected, maybe they've just always ignored by women, and this has left them feeling lonely. Whatever the case, their world of relating to women isn't what they expected it to be. Lost and in search of answers, they turn to the internet, forums, and YouTube videos. This is when they stumble across the red pill. The red pill seems to explain everything he's going through in terms of his dysfunctional relating to women. When MGTOW encounter the ideas of the red pill, they feel relief. They feel relief to find an explanation for their misery. They feel relief that they've found a solution to their problem. They feel relief and then they feel anger. They feel anger towards women. They feel anger towards society. But mostly, they feel anger towards themselves. They feel angry at themselves for allowing themselves to be so careless, for being too naive to see the truth that they are only now discovering through the red pill. Within this anger exists what I think is the defining value of what MGTOW represents. And that value is this. What MGTOW desire above all else is to live a life that is authentic to themselves. And that sounds pretty noble, and it is, but maybe it's not. Let me explain. So, how exactly does the red pill and going MGTOW serve a man's goal to live a life of authenticity? MGTOW provides men with a sort of philosophical reset. It serves as a period of introspection. It forces a man to ask himself questions like, who am I? What do I believe? They begin to discover their true self, a self that they had neglected up until this point in their life because they were too blindly and naively focused on following someone else's ideas. A MGTOW's goal becomes living out a life that is most authentic to himself. The idea system that will serve as the catalyst for this process is the red pill. Using the ideas of the red pill, MGTOW change how they orient themselves to women and society with the goal of bringing these relations into alignment with their true, authentic self. So how exactly does a MGTOW begin to change how he relates to women and society more broadly? Unlike PUAs, MGTOWs don't put their energy into getting laid or getting validation from women. In fact, MGTOW view PUAs with contempt. Remember, MGTOW value one thing above all else. They value living a life that is authentic to themselves. MGTOW view PUAs with contempt because they believe the only place a man should receive validation is from himself. Many MGTOW also seem to come to the conclusion that having a relationship with a woman is at odds with living this authentic life. This is because, due to the combination of their negative experiences with women and the ideas of the red pill that they use to make sense of these experiences, they stop believing that it's even possible to have an authentic relationship with a woman. They think that it's simply a fantasy, a lie created by the blue pill world to keep them slaving away in the matrix. Sacrificing anything for a woman, as one might do in a relationship, is a form of simping. It's a form of inauthenticity. This is why MGTOW are willing to sacrifice relationships with women to some degree. A MGTOW will limit relationships with women to the extent he feels such relationships will limit his ability to express his authentic self. For example, a MGTOW may choose to avoid marriage because he sees only the risks of marriage. He sees marriage as a corrupt institution. Divorce rates are high. Divorces are usually initiated by women. Family courts are biased against men. Most alimony is paid out by men, etc., etc. He sees marriage as a trap that many men unknowingly walk into. A trap that, should he walk into, would limit his freedom and thus his ability to express his authentic self. MGTOW exists on a spectrum in this manner. Some will say they're fine with being with women, but no long-term relationships. Some will say long-term relationships are fine, but no cohabitation. Some MGTOW would even consider marriage acceptable. MGTOW seem less concerned with how a relationship with a woman looks and more concerned with a man's reason for being in that relationship. They care more about the why rather than the who and the what. A MGTOW would be fine being in a marriage despite the perceived risks if that's what he himself has decided is what he truly wants, as opposed to being pressured into it by someone else. Again, it comes back to the value of authenticity. He doesn't want to feel like his choices are to appease someone else because he's shamed into doing something or just because that's what the social norm is. A MGTOW wants to feel like he's choosing his own path through life. Besides having this view on women, I think many MGTOW are also separatists. That is, they aim to separate themselves from broader society to some degree. This is just speculation, but it wouldn't surprise me if there is some correlation with being a MGTOW and being interested in topics such as prepping, off-grid living, and cryptocurrency. Each of these topics would serve the overriding goal of becoming as independent from broader society as possible. MGTOW aim to separate from society for the same reason they aim to separate from women. They view society as a limiting factor in expressing their true, authentic self. They view society as a prison, as an exploitative game that is rigged against them. MGTOW focus on all of the ways that men are expected to serve society. Men are sent into battle to be maimed and killed, while others are allowed to stay home or flee. Men work the dirtiest, most dangerous jobs. Men maintain the very infrastructure of society itself. Men are expected to do these things. If they don't, then they are discarded. They are viewed as lazy and useless. Why would a man voluntarily participate in an exploitative game is what MGTOW men ask themselves. MGTOW find the overall societal dynamic unacceptable. They ask themselves, why should I serve a society that would discard me the moment I stop being useful? Why should I serve a society that views me only as a disposable cog? The MGTOW man decides, I shouldn't. Thus, the separation begins. They work the bare minimum to support themselves. They don't volunteer or participate in civic activities. They refuse to marry or start a family. Since the entire game of society is rigged, they decide the only winning move is to not play. Again, the highest value of MGTOW is living authentically. They will sacrifice everything in service to this value. If society is a rigged game, allowing oneself to knowingly be exploited would be a form of inauthenticity. Thus, MGTOW have judged our current cultural moment and found it to be wanting. Unlike the MRAs, who see it as their mission to improve society, MGTOW can't be bothered. They have no interest in changing society or finding solutions to the parts of society that they have a problem with. A MGTOW's energy is not directed outward to improving society. It's directed inward toward the self. It's towards separating themselves from society and cultivating their authentic self. They mutter phrases like, enjoy the decline, and let it all burn down, etc. And while Rome burns, they are content to cultivate their inner citadel. This is where my critique of MGTOW begins. Without a strong attachment to society, MGTOW men put their time and energy into individual pursuits. These other pursuits include career, self-improvement, hobbies, travel, etc. I think the danger of this is diving too deep into preoccupation with the self. Saying, I just want to focus on my own freedom, my own happiness, and my own self-development to the exclusion of anyone else comes across as pretty narcissistic. I mean, you can continually improve yourself, continuously pursue your own goals, but ultimately, what is this serving? You spend your entire life becoming this Adonis, but for what? For yourself? It's worship of the self. You're going to look back at your life one day and congratulate yourself. It's like, good job, self. It was pretty noble how you spent your whole life masturbating with self-improvement. You can die in peace. I mean, is that acceptable to you? Is it really acceptable? Is it acceptable if you let go of all the rationalizations and intellectualization? Does it feel acceptable? This leads me to wonder, are you really going your own way because you see it as the only choice left to you in a society that stole the path of family and responsibility from you, that made it into a trap? Or do you just want an excuse to remain preoccupied with your own vanity without appearing self-absorbed and immature? MGTOW allows you to blame your inability to shoulder responsibility on society and not on your own immaturity. I'm not even saying it's bad to be narcissistic, even though it is. I'm just saying at least be honest with yourself. Don't pretend you're going MGTOW because you're a poor victim of society and that you would have been this responsible husband and father if only it wasn't for these corrupt family courts and depraved gold-digging women. When the truth is, you just don't want to take on the responsibility. You don't want to take the risk. You don't want to sacrifice anything for someone else. It's like, if you're selfish, fine, be selfish. You can at least be honest about it. You don't get to be both selfish and virtuous. I think the downside of MGTOW is that having relationships is one of, if not the most meaningful experiences in life. Being a lifelong bachelor or just dating casually is probably easier than having a family, but it's almost certainly not going to be more meaningful. It's like, yeah, your wife leaving you is a possibility, but having a great marriage is also a possibility. Even if you do get divorced, at least you tried. At least you won't have the regret when you're 65, laying alone in a hospital bed, wondering, what if I married that girl? I wonder where she is now. There's nobility in that approach. It's like you say, this could end badly, but I'm willing to do my best to make it work. That seems better than realizing you chose video games over the adventure of relationships, which is what being a human being is most fundamentally about. If you generally don't want a wife and children, I suppose going MGTOW is fine. However, I find it hard to believe that most men generally don't want an intimate relationship and children. It just doesn't make sense biologically speaking. It's like we're wired to reproduce. Wanting to have children isn't propaganda. Reproduction isn't a social construct, it's an instinct. If what you really want is a wife and children, but are too afraid to pursue this because of the risks revealed by the red pill, aren't you playing not to lose rather than playing to win? MGTOW view the current culture as dysfunctional, which it is, and that the solution to this dysfunction is to not play the game. This seems reasonable. However, if you're one of these men, consider the following. What if getting you to not play the game is actually the ultimate goal of this dysfunctional society? MGTOW think they have outsmarted the system by not playing, and yet they're actually falling right in line with what it intended all along. Think of it this way. If you allow the cultural forces at work prevent you from reproducing, it's as if you're allowing those forces to delete you from the gene pool. Maybe that's the whole goal of these forces. I suspect that's the case. I guess not playing isn't such a winning move after all. I characterize our current culture as like a wildfire that's burning everything down. Like all fires, it will eventually burn itself out. The only question is, how much will be destroyed before that happens?